I'm Sasi. I head the engineering for MOSIP. MOSIP is an open source identity platform built from India for the world. So we'll speak about, I'm not going to speak about our journey to build or any of those things. I'm going to speak about why and what are all the various things that are part of this project, and also about some of the standards that we are working on in this. So this project is all about how do you break barriers in various places that have been created today. Sometimes the barriers are created without us knowing about it, and sometimes the barriers are created purposefully to avoid a fraud or a fraudulent activity, and then it ends up being a culture or a stigma to it. Okay, so how do you break all of this and build an open source project about it? So quick brief about the project itself. We are almost 4 years old now. We have been in existence, and we have very recently released our long-term support release. So it's a fully open source project built around in GitHub, tested by people around in and around Bangalore and part of India and some part of Africa and Philippines. The majority of the people work from this part of the world. So the core of the MOSIP project is about issuing foundational identity to people. So what a foundational identity is, there are quite a lot of people who doesn't have an ID in this world, and how do we provide them a way in which there is some form of identity for them to prove anyone, whether it is within their country or whether it is outside of their country, how do they use this information to prove it? Okay, that's the core of. Quickly, I'll jump in to the list of places where the current project runs. There are approximately 9 countries today that work with MOSIP. Out of that, there are 2 large countries. One is Philippines. Philippines identity system runs over the MOSIP platform. And there are other countries which are engaged. They are doing there are various steps of it. Some are in the pilot stage, which means they're trying to use it within their country and see is it culturally and is it inclusive in its way in delivering it. It also needs a lot of political will to happen. So there is a lot of politics, bureaucracy, civil and legal that has to be involved in order to make such a project workable in any country. So there is a lot more to it other than the software. But what we are trying to break around is trying to provide the software, which is a big barrier, and we are also trying to break the hardware, which used to be a large barrier in these kind of systems, which is it could be hardware, it could be financial requirement for such a specialized hardware. So we are trying to break all those barriers into using a new advanced one. So let's start questioning ourselves about why ID, right? A lot of people who stay in Bangalore, you would not realize why an ID is potentially necessary in this aspect. But people who stay in the remote villages would understand how much important an ID becomes when they want to actually establish themselves and try to get something from a new person whom is not known in the village. So for example, the villages in the remote villages of Africa or in other places, or maybe in India in the 10 years before, if you have to go and get something from a shop, you will be able to get it. But if you have to get something from the bank, you will not be able to get it. Even though the rate of interest for the loans were cheaper in the bank, you can't avail a bank loan irrespective of you having enough money in your, in spite of you earning enough money as well as keeping enough money in your bank, enough money in your lockers. It has to be in the bank, and the bank needs some form of digital trials. Okay, without this, the bank cannot provide you with the loan. So ID becomes an essential part in order to uplift people in the rural worlds where there is no other form of ID. So if you are in an urban world, one other way you will get a birth certificate, you will get into an education, you will get an educational certificate, eventually you will obtain your license. So you would potentially have some form of ID through which you will potentially lose those potentially you will use those identities that is eventually created. So you don't realize how it gets created, but over time you get a lot of digital trials. So if you look at overall globally, we are looking at 3.3 billion people with ID, and the remaining people have some form of ID which is not usable, and there is approximately 1 billion people who have literally no identification. So in essence, they are not traceable, you can't find them. It's not a good thing when it comes to when they are poor and they are not traceable. I'm not worried about the rich people who are not traceable for whatever reason, right? That's a choice that you make. You leave the choice out. You look at the people who are poorer and you are not being traceable neither by the NGOs, neither by the government, neither by the people who want to help them and move them up. Okay, how do you make that change is why you need an ID. And in another form, if you look at it, there are approximately 45% of women in these economies have no identification and 30% men. So larger amount of women are unaccounted within the system. What does it do for us? The big problem with women not being able to identify is with the childbirth and mortality rates, right? So when a child is born or when the woman is pregnant, you need to have a lot more support for the poorer people to make sure you can give in nutritious food, you can make sure medical and health facilities are available for them. And if they are not traceable, unfortunately, you will not be able to make up into your plannings for how many people, how you want to actually make their life into an uplifted side. Okay. Right. So, in essence, identification is important for everybody, but if you could potentially identify these people whom we say are not identifiable. Okay. If you say you could identify them, then you could help them in whatever necessities that is needed. It could be a government help, it could be a private help, it could be an NGO help, right? It could also be as simple as self-help. Okay. So identification becomes an essential part in order to get services when you are at the lower end of the site. When you are richer, you may in one form or other you would have created your identity, either voluntary or involuntary. Your bank account statement, your phone records, all of this in one or the other form forms as an identity. Okay. What are the risks in identifying people in the digital world? In general, we look at three forms of risk when you want to identify. One is a big privacy concern. Can everybody be identifiable? Can everybody be traceable? Is it good practice? Is it a bad practice to trace everybody? How do we do about it? There is a big privacy concerns around it. There are also other risks about misuse. What if somebody uses my identity? If my identity is stolen, what happens to that? How does the system react to it? Because everybody is now digitally identified. So think about a case where your phone is stolen. You get an OTP over a phone, you get your password resets over the phone, you get your apps running on your phone, you literally get everything that you use today on your phone, right? And what happens when that gets misused? You literally lose a lot of those information, and technologies get built over time to protect you from that. But ideally, misuse is a problem when you speak about digital technologies, and misuse at a larger scale is a bigger problem with digital technologies. So misuse always existed. It's not that we created something very new. Misuse has always been in existence, whether it was a malperformed document that somebody was using, or it is a fake passport that was created. They always existed. It is just that which digital at scale can somebody make it happen, and if at scale if it can happen, then it becomes very disastrous for it. So that's where the misuse comes in. And the breach is the next part of the story. So what if all this information gets leaked out, and with this leaked out information, I could be blackmailed, I could be targeted, I could be it could personally harm me, right? So breach is also a larger part of a problem in identifying people. So these are the risks that you have to encounter. At the same time, you also realize why we need to identify people in order to enable them, right? Now, okay. Now, we do know that we want to identify so that we can actually help people, but you also see that why is this not happening across the globe so easily? Because technology for identification existed from the time Yahoo created its email accounts, and all of us signed up for it from a very long time, right? So Hotmail, Yahoo, and then Gmail today has become a lot of norms, and today Facebook and others has also become some form of identification for you to prove yourself online. But with all these things, we still lack quite a lot of people unable to understand this technology or unable to use this technology. So what has happened fundamentally is we have created various barriers within our systems, right? As I said, the barriers could have been created knowingly or unknowingly, or in order to prevent a fraud, we created this barrier. So one is a large barrier called technology barrier. We have created digital systems wherein people cannot use those digital systems or they don't understand how to use the systems. So one classic example is my own family, right? For my mom, WhatsApp is internet. So when internet goes down, she says WhatsApp has gone down. She doesn't understand difference between an internet and a WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is the one that can closely reach to the remotest of the people today and make them aware of what the external world is. And that's why you see a lot of fake and a lot of other information spreading in WhatsApp, potentially because the reach at which WhatsApp is capable of doing is extremely good, that it broke all the technology barriers and reached it. And obviously India as a country has moved far ahead in that space. Smartphone was with everybody and other things. And if you look at Kenya for that example, or other countries, for example, M-Pesa and mobile money has reached and very deeply penetrated, because that is how they closely associate money nowadays. Because printable money was very tough to get, and digital money was easier, and it was available at their hands with the mobile monies and other things. So you have to repeatedly keep breaking the technology barriers. And in identity, you have a lot of technology barriers. First, username and password. Second, username, password, OTP. In order to get a Gmail account, you need an OTP on your phone, which essentially means you need to have a phone number. And you get a SIM card, you need an identity. So it just gets into this miraculous cycle of things that a lot of times as I said, we don't realize, because we are born with some form of identity with a birth certificate and school education. But when you go to the Africa regions, or you go to a country where ID systems have failed, you will realize how important this becomes essential for people to kickstart somewhere. You have to kickstart somewhere breaking this barrier. Is it right, wrong? Beyond that, it has to be kickstarted somewhere to break this barrier. And that's what we are trying to do here. There are biometric barriers. There are barriers with the legal things. There are problems in identifying who is a citizen, who is not a citizen in certain countries, and that is also a barrier. So this is one form is technology barrier that we created, and we think it is easier to break that down. The second barrier is the legal and the affordability barrier. Legal is about any lawful thing. Is an ID valid enough that I can use it as a legal document? Right? If I can't use it as a legal document, then there is no legal proofing for it. So for example, if you have gone to a bank and tried opening an account anytime in the past, you need to submit quite a lot of identity documents to the bank. Why does the bank need all of it? Because it comes from an international way of preventing money laundering. So it was created to prevent frauds from happening within the system, and as a part of it, people created a concept of know your customer. So until you know to whom you're opening a bank account and who is making the transaction in the bank, you don't want to let them to hold it and use it. So that was a barrier that was created. While it worked well in the Western world, it did not work well in the remaining and the low income worlds, because they didn't have those things. And then when they came into the system to start financial accounting, they were being forced to adhere to these things, otherwise money laundering will become a bigger problem. Terrorism and other things are also becoming a bigger problem with that. So a legal valid document becomes an essential part of it, and that's where the legal barrier was created. Then it is affordability. Can you afford an ID? An ID comes with a cost. Today you go for a license, there is a cost. You go for any of those government services which gives you an ID, you potentially have a cost associated with it. And are everybody in your country, can they afford it? That's a question that we need to ask about, and we need to break that barrier as well in there. Right? Next is the usability barrier. I think the usability barrier is something that we all have witnessed in our lifetime in recent times. So if you look at the way we used to use our debit cards and credit cards in the past, for example, my father gets a debit card, he looks at it, keeps it very safe in a locker, and that's it. He never opens it up again in his lifetime. That's the way he protects his debit card, right? And how do we break those barriers? We use UPI, QR code, and other things, and we have moved away from that barrier, and people conveniently use these systems to go into online banking. But that is exactly why debit cards were created, to get exactly the same direction. But debit card did not break the barrier for us. While it did in the Western world, it did not do it for us. And how do you go about doing that aspect when you speak about ID? So ID has to be really usable every day in people's hands and should be usable. And that is what we try to do. That's a big challenge. We have to achieve that. It is a usability barrier that we created. Right? Next is the ecosystem barrier. So what if I have an ID alone and nobody wants it? Nobody is going to accept it. There is nothing I could do with it. Then it again goes in a locker and stays there forever, and it's never useful for it. But when you provide an ID, there should be in essence for it, you should be able to use it, you should be able to do something about it, right? And if you have to do something about it, then you need an ecosystem to be built around it. So these are some of the major challenges in building an national ID or a foundational ID systems. And these are some of the benefits that you could potentially get in a foundational ID system. So if you break these barriers that we spoke about in the past, then you could get to the new advanced stage where you could be financially inclusive in nature for people. So what does financial inclusion help? So for example, one of the barber that I met in my native, the way he runs his life is every month in the beginning of the month, he borrows 1,000 rupees. And for the 1,000 rupees, 900 rupees is paid to him, 100 rupees is kept by the whoever is the lender. Okay, it's like 100 rupees out of 1,000, so 900 rupees he gets, and 900 rupees he uses, and at the end of the month he has to pay 1,000 rupees. Okay, that's the way this barber works in his lifestyle. And the reason why he works is that's the only guy who trusts him and will pay, because he owns a barber shop, he knows that that person is a local, he stays in that particular village, and he can get hold of him, so collection is a bigger problem, right? And if you are unable to identify people, right? These are smaller worlds, smaller villages, so people were able to identify each other mutually. But if you are in a larger group of things, if you are unable to identify, then the banks and the financial larger systems cannot lend them at a cheaper rates, which means financially you will not be inclusive in your own country. So your own country, your own banks in your country would not trust you to give you money. And if you don't get that money at a cheaper rate, you will not be able to move up in life. So this barrier that we created called financial inclusions, you can break away from it provided you have enabled usable digital systems in the place. So that's one classic example. There are tons of examples that I can create. I have few of them on the charts. So quickly move on to it. What did we do in our system? So it's a pretty large open source project. One of the things that we initially did in the project is to remove those entry barriers that I spoke about. How do you enable people to easily get this ID? So that is the entry barrier that was created. We tried removing that, whether it is technology entry barriers. We broke down the technology layers. We tried to make the technology affordable on a mobile phone, on a tablet, on a cheaper rates, standardized protocols and other things. Similar way, financial side we broke away and tried to make it cheaper. So you move away from specialized hardware into cheaper hardware, then the operation needs becomes cheaper, right? And we also brought in a concept of centralized issuance, but decentralized and multiple verifiers concept. So centralized issuance is one government body or one large government body can actually issue for an identity for everybody, but then you can verify with multiple different people. You don't need the same entity to verify you. You can verify with multiple people. You can also do a completely decentralized verification. So our decentralized verification is potentially based on a standard called W3C VC. VC is a verifiable credential standard. It combines JSON and JSON LD. I'm not sure how many of you know about JSON and JSON LD here. JSON probably knows. JSON LD is a new standard that is coming up, and it's a very interesting way of associating linked data to yourself. So we use that specifically to issue a decentralized identity. Okay. Obviously, security is very important because these systems are very vital in nature. And if you look at any national identity systems, they run it for 100 years or 90 years or longer than that, right? Because everybody in the country builds ecosystems above these national identity platforms. So you need these national identity systems to run for a longer duration and for a very, very large cycle. Social security number is a classic case. It's approximately 200 years old and has actually served quite a lot of purposes in those worlds where it was implemented. Good, bad, ugly, there are a lot of things that you'll learn. Security is a running target. You'll continuously be as a community to fix it and scale it up to the right thing. Quickly, I hope it's visible. This is a rough view about how our architecture looks like, a little more detailed. So you'll need, it's all built over Kubernetes stack. We are potentially using Spring Boot as a way to run microservices, and our underlying platform is all Kubernetes. We publish our Helm charts to the countries. The countries adopt the Helm charts and they use it within their ecosystem. Okay. At the edge, it is all about mobile. So we support both the smartphone and the USSD mode of mobile. On the edge, how do you enable the edge to actually identify yourself. So you don't need to come to a centralized server to verify. You remember the decentralized verification. You don't need to come to the central place, because most of the countries that we work with, the connectivity is a bigger problem. So we use local Bluetooth BLE connectivity to actually establish a mesh and do authentication and verification within the mesh layer. Okay. Pretty large to explain, but in essence, it combines some security and other protocols together. Quickly to our standards. So one of the things that when we started working on this project that we started realizing is, if you don't publish and influence standards in this particular domain, you will not be able to bring down the cost, you will not be able to bring down the affordability, and you will not be able to drive inclusion. Okay, because most of the standards that you see across the globe are created in countries which are well connected, has internet as the backbone. How many times do you encounter a country where USSD is the backbone and not the internet? How many times do you encounter a country where Bluetooth kind of mesh is going to be the backbone and not the internet-based ones would be the backbone? So it is essential for this community, which is MOSIP community, to influence and start working on these multiple standards. So we work today on approximately closer to 8 to 9 odd standards. Some standards we work with IEEE directly. Some standards we work in OpenID Foundation. I think a lot of you know about OpenID Foundation. It's OpenID Connect protocol. So we work with them to enable certain other standards to work with. So our Bluetooth stack-based identity verification is a new standard that is coming up with OpenID Foundation. Similar way about verifiable credential issuance, and also a concept of open wallet, so that an information from one wallet can be transferred to another wallet, and it is interoperable in its nature. So all of this becomes essential for us to make sure people can be verifiable and identifiable with a legally valid document in their place, so that all other inclusive natures could be derived around. So we provide a lot of APIs, we publish a lot of APIs. There are a lot of open source companies which actually use our APIs and build products above them. We have approximately 90 odd ecosystem players who actually build products above our API and run those products in the country. It could be a banking product, it could be an insurance product, or it could be any product that needs some form of electronic identification can be built over our platform, either using our APIs or using our standards like BLE and other stacks that we have created. And all of this will be an interoperable one. Yeah, that's a quick finish about what we have been working on for the last 4 years. And this has been our journey. And we are looking for people who can actually contribute to this project. We are heavily relying on Kubernetes and Java Stack and Angular and React. Anybody who's interested in any of these layers, please come over, join us in our community. It could be your testing time, it could be your using this, or if you want to build a product above our APIs, please connect to it. And as I said, we are approximately live in 3 countries right now, 9 countries in the pipeline to close. Okay, thanks everyone. Any questions?
Thank you for that informative session. Recently, there was a lot of news about Aadhaar data getting leaked, hacked, and so on, right? So what sort of precautions or measures are you taking so that the private data of the citizens is like safe and not leaked like how we heard about Aadhaar? That's one. Secondly, is it just based on a number like Aadhaar, or is it like a smart card that you guys are issuing where the smart card can be used interoperatively with other systems?
Okay. So on the first part, we don't give a permanent ID to anybody. Our identifications are temporary, which means you can revoke it, you can use a completely new form of ID any point in time. The backend system cryptographically manages the token, which ensures that you need not worry about some unique secret number that has to be shared with everybody. That's not part of our goal, and that's not there. Second, on the smart card, I think smart cards are pretty good, but unfortunately they also create quite a lot of technology and affordability barrier. And the newer way of solving that is using the mobile phones. And we are relying heavily on the mobile phones and printed papers using QR code. as a mechanism through which you can ensure it is your identity. So in case of mobile phones, we are creating a standard around a BLE stack, wherein verifiable credentials from one phone can be shared over another phone. You don't need a printability, you don't need a centralized server to authenticate or verify anything. You could share it as simple as how you today take a license and copy it and give it to another person. And it's also purpose, and the audit logs are present in your own phone, so it is a completely decentralized model. You manage your own identity. But in a paper-based models, we can't do that. It is a QR code based digitally signed information with your photograph. It is a tamper-proofed, but obviously people can take data out of it, but nothing you would know about the history of the person, or nothing you would know anything other than the basic information like your name and your photograph.
Thanks. The first question was answered partially. To follow up on that, where and how is the data of the citizens hosted, and how is it safeguarded?
So right now, there is in our architecture there is something called as an identity repository. The repository contains every resident's data encrypted using some of the attribute-based encryption models per resident. And that repository holds each and every resident's basic information. And this is only to manage their life cycle. This is not their verification information. The verification most often comes from the USSD channels and your what to call it. So you try to segregate the issuance model and the verification model. So if you mix it, only then you have a problem. The issuance model is you issue it once and you verify not by yourself, but you verify with multiple others multiple times. So the verification model in our case is a very decentralized model. It could be embedded into your SIM card if some country decides to do so. There are a SIM card model that we have created where it gets embedded into the SIM cards as a cryptographic key, which means the private key is embedded into the card and then used. So the actual public key of that individual is mapped with it and publicly available for anybody to validate. Or it could be a DID document that is published from us, and you could use the DID document from any of these places. So there is a centralized repository specifically maintained to maintain the lifecycle management, but the issuance and the verification is given to the end residents to take over, as well as private companies to participate and make the verification happen.
Thanks for that. Does it also have blockchain? Does your solution, I saw you're using Kubernetes, but do you also plan to incorporate any blockchain technologies in the future or something?
So right now there is no necessity for us right now to go into a blockchain. We are, as said, the BC that we are using, the verifiable credentials and the JSON LD and the DID documents, they are completely distributed models. But you can base it on two bases. One is you can base the same technology on blockchain. You can base the same technology on something called as HTTP network over well-known spec. So in a blockchain, you need to have a certain cost associated with it in order to publish these DID documents and verifiable credentials and other things. But when you use a well-known spec with a HTTP protocol over it, it is distributed, but at the same time it is not something where you need to associate a cost to it, and technologically it is easier to understand. So it is a network. It could run over a blockchain network or a non-blockchain, but right now we are not recommending blockchain. We have not been working on blockchain. We are predominantly over a well-known HTTP spec.